All right, let's take a look at where we left off last time. You can see we have two enemies here, and they get spawned in. This one moves a little slower, comes down here, and they both destroy when they're done. Not exactly sure. I have to look at why this path here, let's see, wave path 01. Let's kind of cycle through this. I'm going to press W here so I can see my tool. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it gets confused around here for some reason. And let me check if my guy is zeroed out on the Z. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that, why that is, because my other one doesn't get confused over here. So the thing is, you don't. There are certain times when you would want your essentially your enemies in the game at start, but most of the time you just want to spawn them in at the specific point, like here. So the first thing we need to do is create inside of our waypoint essentially configuration file here, our scriptable object. We want to create a data or parameter that looks for and stores all of the enemies that we plan to put in the game. Now we already have right here a prefab that we made, and it's inside of our, let's see, do we have a prefab filter? Yeah, we did. Okay. This enemy ship 01 prefab here, and really we could just name this enemy ship. And it looks like in here we really need to have like the waypoint config path. So maybe we'll even just kind of, or the scriptable object rather. It looks like we have two. So for this particular ship, so I guess we could update it in the scene. But we want to instantiate it in the scene, and we want it to have this right here, and then we want to have all the waypoints already set up once we instantiate. All right, so let's set up this up. This might be a little bit longer of a video, but it won't be a difficult video. So I'm going to go ahead and click in front of the serialized field and just duplicate it. And we're going to be creating a list here, and it's just going to be of the enemy prefabs. So list, and it's going to be of game objects, because we wouldn't be able to access everything on the game object or on our enemy. And we're just going to call this one enemy prefabs. I'm going to save that off. Now we have this one, which is get waypoints, and all this does is it returns the waypoints. And what we're going to do is something similar, but what we want to do is, we want to make it a little bit simpler. Right here, we're just getting or returning the waypoints, which are really their transforms, right? A public list of the transforms or the position of our waypoints. Let's create another getter. And this is also, you can consider this also a getter, like anything that's, we start with get here. So you're going to hear these things called getters and setters. Getters get information, setters set the information, and it's a way of protecting these private data. And it's also makes our other programmers explicitly go in and get the data or the information that they want, so that they just don't access the variables and mess them up. So I'm actually going to just duplicate this guy right here, hit Control D, Control Alt Enter to just kind of clear up the formatting. And I'm going to change this to an int. And I'm just going to rename this get enemy count. And I do this a lot whenever I need to, again, like I just need to get some data. I'll create a method itself to give me, whatever that data is. So for example, with this one, we have these enemy prefabs. If I want to get the count or the number of enemy prefabs, what's really nice is we have it in the list, and I could just do .count here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And all this method does now is it just gets the enemy count. So if I call this, I can say, oh, okay, I know how many enemies I now have in my scene. Now, another similar one is if we want to get the enemy prefab, whatever number it is. We've already kind of done this before, where inside of here, where we, or inside of pathfinding rather, where we look at the index, the waypoint index of a waypoint, and that gives us the specific one. Remember, we looked at 0, 1, 2, or whatever. So I'm just going to grab this, highlight it, go one line below, hit Control D again, hit Enter, then hit Control Alt Enter to clear this out. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to say public game object. And this is a method that I'm going to be able to call from another script. So it's going to see get enemy prefab. And what we can do is now we can get whatever, because this is a list, we can get the enemy prefab by its index. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, if I call this from another script, I'm going to need to know the index. So I'll call get enemy prefab from another script. I'll pass in like index 0 if I want to get the first enemy prefab from the list. So all I'm going to do now is return enemy prefabs here. And in this bracket, whatever index they're passing in. All right, so we added some functionality in here. And if I go to, let's see, our scripts, enemies, let's see, scriptable object. If we go inside of here now, and this should have updated. Let's see, waypoint path, move speed. Oh, here we go, enemy prefabs. It just kind of was small there. You can see now we have our enemy prefabs and then the number that gets fed in there. So let's create a new script in here. And we're going to call this one enemy spawner. So create model behavior script enemy spawner. And I'm going to drag this into our scene here. And I'm going to create a serialized field here. And remember, we have two different waypoint paths here, and they're both using these waypoint scriptable object scripts. So whatever our current one is what I want to save here. And I think of these as waves, right? So current wave, and that's that the enemy's moving across here, because I could spawn in more than one and have it follow that wave at different increments. So this right here will give us access to the scriptable object we created earlier, which is just the data containers, these data containers. All right, so let's create this method that we haven't created yet. So spawn enemies. And then I'm going to hold control and period, and I'm going to create that method. And this is really just going to be what's used for instantiating our enemies. All right, so let's go ahead and start typing on instantiate here. And you can see here that it's got a context actions. If I click on this, actually, let's see if I can. Yeah, so if I highlight over this, you can see it's going to give us all of the different types of parameters. So it's like Unity Engine Object Instantiate. It says this very first one, you could just put in whatever object you want. Actually, this bottom one, if you look at, you could just write the object that you want. This other one, you could do the transform and rotation. There's others where you can actually put in a scene. There's just a lot of different things you could do here. We'll start with just that first one so you could see it. So what do I want to instantiate in the scene? Well, current wave, dot, and then what do I want to do? I want to get the enemy prefab that is at slot 0 or index 0. So this is my first one. So when I go to spawn enemies, this right here, just to kind of show you how this works, will just instantiate or spawn the first enemy. Well, we don't have our, if I look at this enemy spawner script here, we don't have any of that stuff set up. So we have to set that up in our scene, like kind of like an enemy manager almost. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? Let me hit comma, and I'm going to go to a new line. So now what I can do is, I had it a moment ago. Let's see if it'll come back. See, sorry. There we go. I messed it up. Well, anyway, the next two parameters, we've done this before, are the transform and the position. I'm thinking, why don't we go ahead and just write those out, because we already have that, right? So remember, we have the we have this get starting point here, waypoint that we created earlier, and it's of type transform. So what this is going to do is going to give us that starting position here that we need to use. So all I have to do is same thing as before, grab current wave here, and then I'm going to do dot get starting waypoint, and the starting waypoint dot position. So this is the position, and then we could just do the same thing again, but with rotation. And the way to do that is we want to have it facing whatever it's spawning into. So we'll just use quaternion identity here. So let's go ahead and save that out. All right, now what I'd like to do is we have some pretty cool logic going on here. Here, let's delete our update for a second. We have this thing where it'll spawn the enemies if we call it, and it'll spawn it at the very starting position here. But what I'd like to do is store whatever our current wave is, right? So remember, this is just storing off. If you look at current wave here, it just gives access to all of this stuff inside of here. So I'd like to like store or save off like a whatever our current situation is with that wave of enemies, right? And that's again pretty easy to do. I just have to create another getter. And so let's go ahead and just do a public variable here. And this is like it's going to be of type waypoint underscore SO. And it's just going to say get current wave. And then all it has to do is just return current wave. So when we call this method here, all it's going to do is it's going to get whatever the current wave is that we're in, right? And remember, this is these we have these individual scriptable objects that have all of this information, and move speed, the path, the number of enemies. So that's like the wave of enemies, and we have multiple of these. So that's just going to get whatever the current one is. So it's going to store whatever, if it's 0, 1, 2, or whatever, and this will return it, and then we could use that inside of our pathfinding script here. So let's save this. Now, let's go back to our pathfinding script here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called enemy spawner. And this is going to be used to give me access to the enemy spawner, which is this guy right here. Remember, all this does is spawn our enemies in the scene. And I'm going to show you a different way. Instead of making this a serialized field and dragging it in there, we're only going to have one enemy spawner in our scene. So what I can do is I can make I could just use the awake method here. Let me go ahead and delete this line. We already know what that does. So I'll start typing awake. I'll let it write that code out for me. And I'm just going to say enemy spawner equals find object of type. Let's see. I think it's by type in the new Unity 6. And then I'm just going to look for enemy spawner here. So if you're using 2022 or 2023 and lower, you have to do find object of type. The new one in Unity 6 is find object by type. And this will find it where if it's as long as it's in our hierarchy here, it'll find it and store it inside of enemy spawner for us instead of having to create a bunch of these fields. I don't know, like in the old days, this wasn't very performant. So if you use this a lot, it kind of slowed it down, and that's why we didn't use it a lot. So I don't know if it's very performant now, but I don't think it's a big deal if we're only using it once, to kind of find things on a simple game like this. All right, so now we have this variable here, this WP config here, and it says changed in 0 assets. If I click on that and I press F12, you could see that, let's see, we have it accessing speed down here. And, so it's kind of accessing the file itself. So what we can do now is I'm going to change it up just a little bit. Is that inside of start, I'm going to say this is equal to, and then enemy spawner dot get current wave. So this can be a little bit confusing. So let me sort of explain what's going on here. Inside of enemy spawner here, we're using it to get our current wave. So whatever our current wave is, remember we have multiple waves, right? Multiple scriptable objects, and multiple of them have move speeds. Remember we changed the move speed on this one to make it slower. So inside of our pathfinding script, now what we're saying is WP config now equals whatever the current scriptable object with the current speed and the current setup is. So inside of here now, if I go to WP config and I scroll down to the bottom, all of this code gets updated too, right? Where anywhere that says the WP config, I think this is the only other place. So now this move speed that it's getting is whatever the current scriptable object is. Like for example, this one has a move speed here that's of 10. If I go down here, this one has a move speed of 5. So as we cycle through inside of enemy spawner, each wave, this is also going to get updated here. Like this, sorry, let me go to pathfinding. This is all going to be updated as well with the current parameters, this WP config. So it'll get waypoints, and it'll update with the current waypoints, which are whatever's in that list, the current prefabs, all that good stuff. And remember, the waypoints here are referenced inside of this script, which represents this path here. these prefab paths. All right, so let's go ahead and set this up. I'm just going to make a empty game object, and it's going to be called enemy spawner. So create empty here, name this enemy spawner, and I'm going to grab that enemy spawner script and drag it on here. And now you could see that it's looking for the current wave. And so these are already set up as prefabs. So if I grab my waypoint 01 here, or the scriptable object rather, sorry, and I drop that in here, now you could see that the current wave is equal to this one that's down here. And if we select our enemy ship here, you could see that this should have updated. Let's see. Actually, here's our back in our pathfinding script. We don't actually need this anymore. But you know what? I'll leave it on because I'm going to show you. If I press play right now, it should automatically load this in anyway. So if I press play, it's going to load in the one from here. There we go. Because this WP config here is, remember, it's now referencing whatever the current wave is. And notice also that, remember, we have two ships in here. We have enemy ship 01, and I press play. You can see now that even though they're both there, it's no longer going to the second one because now it's referencing, we haven't passed in the second wave, right? That other one. This thing's only spawning in that first wave in our script. So like if we look here, sorry, in our pathfinding here, we're now using this and we're referencing the one that's inside here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that serialized field and save this. Because remember, pathfinding is what's on our enemy ship here, and it'll get rid of all of these parameters. And then we no longer need this serialized field either, which shows the waypoints. I just had that in there so you can see it, because now we know it works. So this is just kind of cleaning up the script. All right, so let's focus for now just on one enemy ship and then one path. All right, so let's focus just on this waypoint here path. And I have this set to 0, so I'm going to get rid of that 0 because we have this 1 here. And then let's go ahead and actually, you know what? Yeah, so this one here, this is waypoint 1, and then this could be waypoint 0 here. I forgot if the reason I didn't adjust it was because it wasn't updating anyway when I duplicated it outside of the scene view. And actually, if you remember in our script here, this enemy spawner script, we actually down towards the bottom, right over here, we actually instantiate our enemy into the scene at wherever our waypoint path is, this first option here, at index 0. So we can actually just delete enemy ship 1. And then if we select our enemy spawner script here, you can see it says current wave. So let's select our current wave here, which is this right here. And then I'm going to just grab one of my enemies, this enemy ship 1, and just drag it here. And I can actually just drag another one here. Let's go ahead and script it where maybe we space it out where they spawn at different times coming into the same waypoint path here. And actually this code should work if I press play. So let me actually, for now, let me just do one ship. Let me press play. You can see it now spawns that enemy in. He goes into our scene. He's a little offset. I wonder if it's because my path is off. Here's the y-axis. All of these guys, I mean, they're there. And they're flat on 0. Is my enemy flat on 0? Let's see, enemy ship 1. Yeah, it's all zeroed out. Interesting that there's a little bit of offset. It could be, let me see. If I double click my enemy ship here. Yeah, that's the position 0 of our ship. And that's zeroed out too. Yeah, I'll have to look into why it's offset a little bit. That's interesting. Something else I want to point out is when I press play, how do we know if something has been instantiated in the scene or it's always been there? Unity will place a clone at the end of it saying that it's been instantiated in our scene. Now, something else I did in previous tutorials is I love to create a container. So what I want to do is, remember this enemy spawner script is on here. Instead of them just spawning into the scene, I want them to become a child of this, so this becomes a container and it keeps my scene cleaner. So if I just write the word transform here, what it'll do is it'll find the transform of whatever object this script is attached to, and then it'll just spawn those enemies as a child of this. So let's go ahead and press play here. You can see now, if I expand this, there's that enemy clone. Let's save our project. All right, so what we can do now is pretty easy. If we want to loop through and spawn like individual like enemy ships, like through our enemy spawner, we can let's go ahead and take a look at how to do that. So inside of our enemy spawner script here, and like let's see here, here's waypoint path 0, enemy spawner, and it's got WP0 scriptable object. So let's go ahead and create a bunch of ships. Oops. So we're using 0 here. So I'm just hitting plus, and that should automatically duplicate it. And just to double check, we are using WP0 here. And we've got inside of this waypoint scriptable object 0 here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 ships. So all we have to do is just create a for loop here. So I'm just going to hit 4 and hit tab. And I'm going to grab all of this code. And you can either hit Control X if you want and just click on there and paste it. And what I want to do is say, okay, at 0, I equals 0. As long as I is less than my current wave. Remember, our current wave here gives us access to the scriptable object. Inside of our scriptable object here, we have a variable that says get enemy count that's currently not being used, but that'll give us the number of these objects, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it'll give us the 4 objects because this is the same script. So all I have to do is say, okay, current wave dot, and start typing get, and there's a get enemy count here. So as long as 0 is less than the current enemy count, I'm going to increment I, and then this for loop runs as long as this condition is met. So long as I is less than the enemy count, it's going to keep spawning these guys in our scene. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save this, and I'm going to press play. And now we should see multiple enemies spawning underneath our enemy spawner here. See that? Let me pause it. The issue though is they're not spawning like they're not spawning in sequence, right? They're only spawning, they all spawn together at once, right? So here's one, here's another one, here's a third one. So we need to space this out, right? We need this for loop to instantiate these at different time intervals. And one way to start doing that is instead of 0 here, where we're only indexing, we're getting the current wave, we get the enemy prefab. Well, we want to get the enemy prefab, so I'm going to hit I here. And this is going to be, it's going to increment it at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's save that. All right, we're getting pretty long in this tutorial. What we'll do in the next video is we'll update our scriptable object script with the spawn time, as well as really the logic for between these different scripts on how to spawn or space them out.